All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving headfirst into Switchblade, this free-to-play game that drops you right into the middle of a crazy 5v5 vehicular arena. And the goal, pretty simple: blow stuff up and secure the victory. And you know what? You've given us a ton of research on this game, so we are locked and loaded, ready to arm you with the knowledge you're going to need to completely dominate.
And you know what makes Switchblade super interesting? It's not like those other games where you just pick the coolest looking ride and then just smash into the other guys.
Yeah.
You can actually switch between different vehicles in the heat of battle.
Yeah.
And that adds this whole other layer of strategy to all the mayhem.
Okay, so let's break this down. The goal is to take down the enemy base, right? Sounds pretty straightforward. But here's where things get really interesting. You can pick from 5 different classes of vehicles: armored, artillery, tank, scout, and fighter. And they've all got their own unique strengths and weaknesses. So it's like putting together the perfect team, but instead of wizards and warriors, you've got like futuristic tanks and these supercharged sports cars with lasers.
That's right. And while the research you sent over doesn't cover every single vehicle in the game, it does highlight some real fan favorites. And it gives us some really good insights into some overall strategies. Like one thing they kept bringing up was how important the support roles are.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, even in a game that's all about blowing things up, having a really good support vehicle can totally make or break your team's chances.
Absolutely. And that totally tracks with what we're seeing in a lot of those other team-based games. It's not always about getting the most kills, you know? It's about keeping your team in the fight. And speaking of support, those sources you sent over specifically called out Angel and Tiny Giant as like the top contenders. They're always racking up the MVP awards, so you know they're consistently helping their teams to get those victories.
Yeah, and what makes Angel and Tiny Giant so effective, especially for newer players,
Mm.
is that they're all about those team-oriented abilities. You're less reliant on your own skills, and you can have a big impact on the match just by keeping your teammates alive and shielded.
Yeah, that's huge for anyone who's just starting out, right? You can learn the maps, figure out how the battles usually go, you know, experiment with some different strategies, and you don't have to feel like you need to be some kind of pro to actually make a difference for your team.
Exactly. And if you're dying to get in there and cause some chaos, Porcupine's another vehicle that came up a lot as being surprisingly beginner-friendly.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah. And don't let its scout classification fool you. This speedy little beast is all about disrupting the other team and opening up opportunities for your team to capitalize. It's a great way to get a feel for the map and for good positioning, thinking strategically.
Okay. And it's got like a good mix of offense and support too, right?
Right.
Like it's got a speed boost so you can zip around the map. It's got mines you can lay down to slow down anyone who's chasing you. And then it's got this ultimate ability called Lockdown Storm that completely freezes enemies in place.
Yep, dead stop.
That's wild.
And that's where Switchblade gets really interesting strategically. Lockdown Storm isn't about just catching one enemy off guard. It's about setting up these game-changing plays for your entire team.
Okay, so we've got support covered, but what about those players who like to hit the gas and go? The sources we got were raving about Kamikaze.
Oh, yeah.
If you blink, you might miss it.
It's all about speed with Kamikaze. It really rewards those players who like to play aggressively, get in, cause some damage, and then get out before the enemy even knows what hit them.
Yeah, I can see that being really satisfying, zipping around the battlefield and just causing all kinds of havoc. But even though speed is awesome, it's not everything. You need more than just a need for speed to really succeed on a game like Switchblade.
Right. Like, remember how those sources highlighted support roles? They're crucial.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Angel and its healing abilities, we talked about that. But Gravitron brings something completely different to the table when it comes to support. It kind of tries to be a support and a scout at the same time.
Yeah, the sources called it weird, but also maybe like incredibly powerful if you know what you're doing. I'm guessing that's because of its singularity ability. That sounds pretty intense.
It is. Remember how we talked about Lockdown Storm from Porcupine, how it freezes
And it
enemies?
stops them dead in their tracks.
Yeah. Well, singularity is like next level area denial.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a black hole on the battlefield, and it sucks in any enemy who gets too close.
Whoa, okay. So instead of just freezing them, you're pulling them into this chaotic mess where your team can just unleash everything.
Exactly.
That's wild.
And that's what makes the strategy in Switchblade so cool. Because if you time it right and your team's ready, a well-placed singularity can totally change how a battle is going.
So you're saying communication is key with that one.
It is. You don't want to drag an enemy out of your teammate's line of fire or pull them into a better spot for them.
Right.
So yeah, it's high risk, high reward.
I like it. So high risk, high reward. Let's talk about Porcupine again for a second. Because we talked about its crowd control abilities, freezing everyone. But what happens when you pair that up with the right team?
Oh man, it can completely dominate.
The sources love this little guy. They were saying things like pairing it with tanks like Fortress and Hogfog.
Oh yeah, and you know why, right? Think about this. You're zipping around as Porcupine laying down those speed boost trails, and your tank buddy, let's say his Fortress, is right behind you just soaking up damage while the rest of your team pushes forward.
So it's like Porcupine is the ultimate wingman, softening up the enemy, creating chaos, and then making sure that the tank is at the front.
Exactly. And then you want to lock down that victory. Lock down Storm, freeze everyone, and then Fortress just unleashes.
Oh man, that sounds devastating. The sources also mentioned pairing Porcupine with artillery.
Oh yeah, that's a good combo too.
Why is that?
Because artillery vehicles in Switchblade, they are the kings of long range.
Oh yeah, they can do some damage from afar.
They can, but they're not exactly known for their speed.
That's true. That's where Porcupine comes in, right?
Exactly. They can use their speed and all their disruptive abilities to control how the fight is going and create these perfect opportunities for artillery to rain down.
I love it. Okay, so we've talked about support, we've talked about speed. Let's talk about the heavy hitters, the tanks. Those sources you sent over could not stop talking about Fortress. They were saying it might even be a little bit overpowered, especially when it comes to destroying the enemy base. So, Fortress, this thing sounds like it's in a whole other league. These sources make it sound like it's an absolute beast, especially when it comes to pushing towards the enemy base, dealing damage, just wreaking havoc. They even mention something called Fortress Mode. What is that?
Yeah. So Fortress Mode basically takes this already tough tank and puts it on steroids. It just lets it dish out even more damage, and it can just take so much more punishment.
Yeah.
I like to think of it kind of like a battering ram, but instead of being made of like wood and metal, it's just pure firepower.
I love it.
And you know what the sources said about it? They said that it's just so effective, maybe even a little too effective, at pushing straight for the enemy core, ending the match quickly.
Yeah, they used the term overpowered quite a bit.
Right.
Sounds like Fortress might be getting some adjustments pretty soon, maybe some nerfs. But, it's always a balancing act for game developers, especially in games with so many different vehicles and playstyles.
Totally. You want vehicles that are impactful and powerful, but not to the point where they completely run the game and you can't use any other strategies, right? Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how Fortress evolves, but right now it's definitely a force to be reckoned with.
Okay, so we've covered support, we've covered speed, and we've covered tanks that can just destroy everything. What about the vehicles that are just good old attackers? The sources mentioned the fighter class, but they didn't really go into too much detail.
Yeah, think of fighters kind of like your all-rounders.
Yeah.
They're not as specialized as tanks or as disruptive as scouts, but they pack a serious punch, and they're generally quicker than other classes.
Okay, so like the solid all-around damage dealers.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
right.
And then there are those long-range specialists, the artillery class. The sources really emphasize that positioning is everything with those vehicles.
Oh yeah, for sure. Artillery vehicles can absolutely control the battlefield if they're positioned right.
Mm-hmm.
Bombarding from a distance, just making life miserable for the other team.
It's a classic trade-off. You get amazing power, but you sacrifice some mobility. It sounds like you really need to know the maps like the back of your hand to do well with those. Yeah. Anticipate where the enemy is going to be, work really closely with your team.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so fun to go through these sources with you, right? Like you've got the basics, you're starting to get it, but then they throw these little curveballs at you.
Yeah, right. Like they mentioned Battle Pass 1 and how it's going to introduce this whole new vehicle called, get this, the Angel.
I know, right?
It's kind of weird because there already is an Angel vehicle, and it's this awesome support.
Right. What are they going to do with that?
We'll have to see, I guess. But okay, let's wrap this whole thing up. We have gone from 0 to 60 on Switchblade. You've got the rundown on the different vehicle types. We've talked about strategies and how to create those powerful combos. And we've even uncovered a few mysteries along the way.
We have, yeah.
But here's the thing. This is just the beginning. The real fun is when you get in there and try it out for yourself, experiment a little, figure out what works best for you. And who knows, maybe you'll be the one at the top of those leaderboards with some crazy new strategy no one's even thought of. Keep those engines hot, everyone, and we'll catch you next time.